So Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Rick. Good to be here.
I've spent a marvelous week listening to hours and hours and hours of your talks that you've given in the past. I think what you're doing is really important, and so I'm thrilled to have this conversation with you.
Cool. Well, I've been looking forward to this, Rick.
Yeah, good. So if this were a 1-minute interview, what would you want to start with?
That we are in the largest transformation of religious sensibility in perhaps human history, a second axial age. I call it the evidential reformation, where all the religions of the world are coming to realize that there is no future for humanity or for their faith if we don't come into right relationship to reality, which includes coming in right relationship to nature and time. I sometimes say reality is my God, evidence is my scripture, and ecology is my theology. And said another way, any understanding of God that doesn't include what we today mean by the word reality isn't God. Reality is Lord. That's not a belief, that's a fact. That is, everything submits to and is accountable to what today we would call reality, what's real, whether you believe in it or not. And any understanding of scripture that doesn't include evidence is not God's word. Evidence is the main way reality is revealing truth to us today. Not only the evidence of our own experience, but also scientific, historic, and cross-cultural evidence. So that can't be, that needs to be lifted up at the realm of divine revelation or God's word or scripture. And then any understanding of theology that doesn't include ecology, that is the science of living in a right relationship to time and nature, two of the aspects of reality that are inescapably real, is also a theology that our grandchildren will condemn us for. So it's the greening of religion, but also that has to happen for us to green the economic system. We have an economic system that's demonic. In fact, I just wrote a blog post last week called when religions fail, economics becomes demonic. Meaning, and what I mean is nothing otherworldly. What I mean is that a system that rewards the few at the expense of the many and forces all of us to harm the future. I mean, if the word demonic has any meaning in a modern world, it's got to include that. And we've got an economic system that does exactly that. It measures progress and growth and success by how fast we can take nature and turn it into pollution, and in the process condemn the future. So the distinction between pro-future and anti-future. I mean, we're at the place now where all of our institutions and activities and theologies and religion, everything needs to be discerned by, does this assist humans coming into a mutually enhancing relationship with the natural world, or does it hinder or harm the future? So pro-future versus anti-future. And when I speak in Christian context, I say pro-Christian or Christian, that is saving the future, or anti-Christian, that which is condemning the future.
It's ironic that a lot of Christians deny climate change and so on. We'll get into that and the underpinnings of why that might be. But one thing I heard you talk about quite a bit in various talks was the notion of God as external to nature, external to the universe, kind of a divine clockmaker, you use that metaphor, and thereby, viewing the universe as mechanistic and sort of devoid of the divine essence, if you will, versus seeing God as immanent and seeing everything is in God and God is in everything. There's just no separation. It's a seamless merging, kind of like water in a sponge. Although even more than that, because I would go on to say that it's not just water in the sponge, but the sponge and the water are both God. So maybe we can play on that a little bit and how that worldview has created so much trouble.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what you're pointing to is that our metaphors matter, the analogies and metaphors that we use for reality matter. They shape our attention and put our consciousness in a certain track that can be either life-giving and pro-future or life-damaging and anti-future. And our concepts of God can do the same thing. In fact, I think that it's not, secular people are attacking some of the new atheists and secular folk are often attacking religion, saying religion's the problem because they even have a God concept. Well, I suggest that's missing the point too. The word God can either be thought of as pointing to some supernatural entity who lives off the planet and outside the universe, who blesses some and smites others. That's a trivial, impotent, inconsequential God. Or The word God can be understood from a science-based way. The one science-based way of understanding of God is that all God talk, all gods and goddesses are personifications, that is, giving human characteristics to something that's inescapably real. I mean, Poseidon wasn't the god of the oceans. Poseidon wasn't the spirit of the oceans. Poseidon was a personification of the incomprehensibly powerful and capricious seas. Gaia was a personification of Earth, not the goddess of the Earth or not the spirit of the Earth. You know, Helios was not the god of the sun, but a personification of this inescapably real reality that gives us life. So the word God, if the word God is not personifying inescapable reality, then it's a trivial God that actually, if we think that we can worship God and trash the environment or treat others in an unjust way, we're out of touch with reality. So our concepts of God matter. And yes, as you say, this idea, as pointing out that I say this a lot, that if we think of God as a clockmaker outside a clockwork universe, which is pretty much the worldview we've had for the last 500 years, we're going to be desacralizing nature. Nature is no longer a thou to be related to and honored and respected. Nature's an it that we can exploit, or we think we can exploit and use for our benefit with no consequences to us. That's a catastrophic mistake. But it also trivializes God. God is no longer immanent and omnipresent. You know, there's no place that God stops and something else starts. But God is now thought of as a being outside a clockwork universe that you can either believe in, theism, or disbelieve, atheism. And so you got this debate, you know, thousands or maybe millions of people that are debating whether or not God exists or whether or not God is real, when the one real God, namely reality, personified or not, we've been out of right relationship to, and we're now about to experience consequences of biblical proportion. So our views of God seriously matter. That's why I like the nesting doll, like Russian nesting dolls. You know, this is a fundamental truth that we know through science, through evidential revelation, is that the universe or reality is comprised of nested spheres of creativity, subatomic particles within atoms, within molecules, within cells, within organisms, you know, and so on and so forth, all the way up. And so God then, any understanding of God that doesn't include basically a name for that one and only creative reality that includes all others, yet also transcends all others, is a God that doesn't deserve to be honored and in fact, will lead us down a destructive path.
There are about 4 main points in there that I want to go into in depth with you, and probably when I start going into the first one, you're going to give me 4 other main points that I want to go into in depth with you, because this stuff is so great.
I'll keep my answers shorter.
No, it's all right. It's all right. We'll get to them all. The first is one thing that amazes me, and always has, is that scientists and surgeons and people like that who look really closely at nature could be atheists or could regard what they're seeing as mechanistic. Because, I mean, you look at anything close, it's easy to take stuff for granted if you just waltz through your day, you know, just living your life, doing your stuff. But if you start looking closely through a telescope, through a microscope, with an educated understanding, you start seeing this miracle in every cell, in every galaxy. I mean, there's this incredible thing going on. How can that be random billiard balls running into each other?
Yeah, but see, I've got to jump in here, Rick, because
please.
this is, you know, I don't often find myself in the position of defending atheists, but I'm going to have to in this moment. Most non-religious people, or people who don't feel comfortable with traditional God talk, because it's all this otherworldly supernatural stuff. I mean, if all the people in your life who use God talk use it in a way of a supernatural being who is on the side of this group of people and condemning this group of people, then an atheist is simply somebody who says, I don't believe in that being.
Yeah,
and
I agree with that.
Atheists to say that.
Sure.
But most atheists and most secular people that I know of that are really into the science, they don't see it as billiard balls. They see this emergentist perspective. We have Michael Shermer is a friend of mine, the head of Skeptic Magazine.
Right.
You know, Connie's known Richard Dawkins for decades. I mean, these are people who don't have a mechanistic worldview. They're emergentists. That is, they see it's not either determined, God preordained it and put it all together, or chance. It's creative. We have a creative reality, a creative cosmos, an emergence. That greater complexity keeps emerging out of lesser complexity. So I just feel a little awkward because I don't want to be dissing people saying that they believe this and how could they be so dumb and stupid, because that's really not what they believe anyway.
No, that's good to know, and I appreciate that. So what do these people, Shermer and Dawkins and Harris and so on, if you can speak on their behalf, what do they make of this creativity that they see, this emergent creativity? What do they think that is?
They basically think that it's reality, it's holy, it's sacred, it's whatever, but they don't attribute some supernatural intelligence to the one that created it. They see the whole thing as divine. I mean, some of them wouldn't use the word divine, but they see the whole thing as worthy of our deepest respect and honor and commitment. And so, I mean, frankly, this isn't necessarily a direction I'm that interested in, because we don't have time to convert each other over the issues of theology or metaphysics. We need to redesign our economic systems globally, which is going to take a level of cooperation across ethnic, religious, political differences in the service of a healthy future. Otherwise, we are literally condemning our children and grandchildren to hell and high water. So my focus lately, the last 2.5 years, have been really big on climate change, because I see, which I don't even call global warming, I call it radiation entrapment. And that's what it is. It's solar radiation. We're entrapped by it. And that radiation entrapment is going to be creating a lot of climate chaos. Every place isn't going to get warmer, as the United States experienced last year as a direct result of radiation entrapment. We had the coldest winter on record practically, and Alaska was baking with the hottest winter on record.
Sure, because the jet stream was pushed
exactly
around
the jet
polar
stream's
vortex.
doing this loopy stuff, right? Exactly, and it's global weirding. But because one season may be brutally cold, the next season may be brutally hot, the next season may be brutally dry, the next season may be brutally wet. That's global weirding, and that's going to screw up the climate patterns. It's going to make it very difficult to have food that feeds as many people as need to be fed. So I'm tending these days to focus a lot less on theology and metaphysics and a lot more on, okay, we don't agree on that? No problem. Let's set that aside. What can we agree on so that we can work together to ensure a healthy future? That's sort of the bottom line for me these days.
But one thing I think you're doing, though, is you feel that the more fundamental level at which we can operate, the more effectively we can change things. The principle of a fulcrum. And so, what can we get down to that will, shift the course of the? I mean, it's like an ocean liner has this little rudder in the back, little compared to the size of the ship, and if that turns just a little bit, the whole big ship turns. So, if we want to really change people's behavior, what's the most influential, what's the most pivotal level at which we can function in order to do that? And I think that when we can ask that question, we have to address the metaphysics a little bit, because changes in our deepest understandings of the way nature works are going to ripple up in terms of the way we behave.
Exactly. No, I completely agree. My only point is that if what we need to do is live individually and collectively in such a way that decade by decade the soil is getting healthier, decade by decade the carbon is being reduced from the atmosphere, that decade by decade the forests are getting healthier, if that's what we need to do, there's going to be lots of different metaphysical and theological and philosophical ways of getting there. There's not going to be one right way, the only way to think about the nature of reality that helps us live in a right relationship to reality. Now, I personally am rather passionate about what I call the path of factual faith or sacred realism. I'm a religious naturalist. I have no supernatural or otherworldly beliefs, but that's just my worldview. There are deep, close friends of mine who do have supernatural, otherworldly beliefs from a lot of different traditions, and yet they're also committed to permaculture, sustainability, reducing our carbon footprint, living more lightly on the planet. So
what's the common denominator between you and those friends?
We're all pro-future. Mm-hmm. We're all we're all pro-nature and pro-future. That is, our individual lifestyles and our collective impact on the natural world, on what I call primary reality. I mean, primary reality is that which gives birth to life, that which sustains and nurtures life, and that which receives life at its end. Mm-hmm. And whether you call that God or the goddess or the universe or cosmos or, whatever, Buddha nature, we are all part of that what I call divine reality, and we need to honor it as divine. So we have not, for the last few hundred years, been honoring the soil, the water, the air, the forests, and other life forms as divine or as sacred or as precious or as worthy of our deepest respect. We've been treating all of that as merely resources for us to use, and it's a short-sighted vision of the future. We haven't been thinking in terms of the fact that we allow corporations, for example, to buy 100 acres of land, build all this factories, put all their waste into that soil, and then move to some foreign country without being responsible for putting that land back in the way it was beforehand is insanity. We have an economic system that's insane because it's all about using nature with total short-term lenses. We're not thinking in terms of the seventh generation, that we should behave and act and decide and live our lives in the present in a way that's a blessing for 7 generations. We've been so unsustainable, and, you know, the word unsustainable and the word evil, they're both pointing to the same thing. God's fundamental law, that is life's fundamental law for all species, is don't live in the present in ways that diminish or destroy the future. But we're doing exactly that, and we have to shift that. And I think we're going to need a lot of people. We're going to need Christians and Buddhists and Hindus and Jews and atheists and everybody to work together to move forward. That's why I'm more interested in that practical stuff.
Yeah. And so I guess one question would be, why do we do that? I mean, what is it about our corporate mentality or collective mentality that causes us to destroy nature and squander our resources without regard for future consequences? Well, let me just throw that question at you before asking another one.
Well, that's a really good question, Rick. And I don't know that I've got a great answer, but I've done some thinking on this.
Because if we're going to stop doing it, we might help to know why we're doing it.
Right. Well, one of the things, as Martin Buber, the famous Jewish theologian, said decades and decades ago, that if we treat nature as merely an it to be used and exploited by us, rather than a thou to be honored and respected in its own right, he said, not only is the divine not present, but that we will cause our own extinction. We can no longer afford to do that. Nature will be respected or we will suffer the consequences. It's not like nature's a cute bunny that needs our protection. No. Nature is the presence of God. And if we don't begin to respect, we don't humble ourselves and respect the natural systems upon which we depend, the carbon cycles, the nitrogen cycles, the carbon dioxide, basically we have to learn from nature as if nature is the voice of God, and if nature's laws are God's laws, and we either need to abide by those laws or we suffer the consequences. We will create the hell for ourselves and our children. So I think the biggest thing is to learn ecology. I think ecology is the new theology. And different people, different religious traditions will come at it a different way, but the science of ecology, the science of learning to live within limits. God is in the limits. We have to honor ecological limits. This idea that we can have an everlasting, growing economy when the quality of the air, water, soil, and life upon which that economy depends is declining. So the primary economy of nature is decreasing, contracting in health and vitality and vibrancy, and yet we think we can have a never-ending, it's insane. So that's what we can agree on, is to learn ecological principles. That's why I consider the single most important book in print today to be this book, William Catton's book, Overshoot, The Ecological Basis of Revolutionary Change. It was written in 1980, and I consider it not only the most important book of the 20th century, but it's currently the most important book, in my opinion, in print, because again, it doesn't matter what
more important than the Bible, I suppose.
Well, I treat this like modern day scripture. I treat this as that God, reality, is speaking through William Catton. And it's not just me. The interesting thing, if you just put William Catton tribute, my page comes right up. And I've got quotes and longer tributes from these amazing scientists and environmentalists who are virtually all of them saying that this is one of the top 2 or 3 most significant books they've ever read in their lives. And some of them, like Derek Jensen, says it's the most important book of the 20th century.
Let me come back to I and thou. I think it's a key thing.
Sure.
And I think we can take it a step further, because if God is really omnipresent, then there is nowhere where he, I'll just say he for convenience sake, is not. And therefore, ultimately the reality of creation is a unified wholeness. And I and thou still sounds rather dualistic to me. It sounds better than I and it, but it's still rather dualistic. And so when we are destroying the rainforest, it's not just that we're destroying God's lungs, we're destroying our own lungs. When we're poisoning the rivers and oceans, we're not just poisoning God's blood, we're poisoning our own blood. And that's an even greater intimacy, I think, with nature than thinking of I and thou, where there's some distance between, whatever we are and whatever is running nature.
Exactly. Well, I mean, what you're pointing to, and this is why I appreciate the way my friend and colleague Ken Wilber frames it as well, which is this sort of the first, second, third person of God. That is, reality shows up as an I-thou relationship, that second person, as an I, that I am that, that there's this identification that we are literally the result of 13.8 billion years of creativity now becoming conscious of itself. So we are literally the universe becoming aware of itself. We're nature uncovering its own nature. And we don't believe that. We know that, there's not a scientist in the world that I know that would debate that a human being looking through a telescope is the universe just gawking at itself like, whoa. A biology student looking at a microscope is the planet Earth learning with awareness, with consciousness, how it's functioned unconsciously and instinctually for billions of years. So there's that I am that, thou art that whole sense. So that absolutely, that's a sense that nature is not separate from me, that I am. As John Seed says, I'm not John Seed protecting the rainforest. I'm the rainforest protecting itself through John Seed.
Yeah, that's not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So yes, absolutely. There's how we think about the divine and how we think about our relationship to nature. There are times when I am so present in outside of symbolic language. I'm just in the experience of this oneness, that I am this, reflecting on itself. I'm not different from it. I'm completely a part of it. And for me to protect nature is the same intimacy as if I stopped you from trying to cut off my arm. It's like me we're talking about.
Right, exactly.
And then there's also the I, thou, where that's the divine other. There's some of the humility that comes, that this larger reality gave me birth. And then there was also the ayet, which is, there's times when we actually think of resources in terms of copper or gold or silver or food, where we get our food. And we can step into that I and I, thou as well. But I think all three of these ways of thinking need to be honored. And so I appreciate you for pointing that out, because I think it is vital. I think it's important.
I think that's what Christ may have meant when he said, whatsoever you do unto the least of these, you do unto me. Right. And any of us could say that, actually.
Right.
It's like, we're doing whatever we do to anything, we're doing it to ourselves.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. I don't want to, we're going to, don't worry, we're going to keep coming back to ecology and climate change and all that. It's very important to me. I just want to touch upon the personification point that you made a little bit.
Great. I was hoping you'd come back to that. That's great.
Okay, great. And perhaps you could just quickly recapitulate what you said about that, and that'll give me a springboard for asking you a question or two.
If I were to try to describe what I consider to be the single most important scientific discovery about religion in the last 100 years, and I know that's a big claim I'm making, but I think it's true, it can be summed up in the one word, personification, or personalizing. That is, we now know, again, we don't believe this, we know this, that our brains are inherently relational. We can't not relate. Our brains are instinctually programmed to relate, and we typically relate through human categories. So we throughout human history, we've treated the river or the soil or the oceans or whatever in a personified way. And all gods and goddesses are personifications, not persons. What Connie and I call great soul, S-O-L. So we don't relate to what most people call the sun, little s. We relate to that reality as great soul. So in the morning, we sing, hi, hi, great soul. And we've got this little song that we sing. And then at night, we sing, bye, bye, great soul. And we've got this little song that we do,
Cute.
Nora is our personification of North America. That we don't call this continent North America. We call this reality Nora. That is, we give human characteristics to this continent. And we have this intimate, personal love relationship with this continent. Angel is our van. We personify our van as Angel. It's our bedroom on wheels. We actually don't have an RV. We live out of the generosity of others who open up their homes to us, and we've got our bedroom on our back, an Angel. But we also personify our relationship. There's Connie, there's Michael, and then there's Jasmine. And Jasmine is the mythic personification that we've given to us, or to we. And sometimes it's really clear what Michael wants to do, and it's clear what Connie wants to do. But when one of us asks the question, what does Jasmine want in this situation? It allows me as a man to not be attached to my position. And I can actually go with something Connie might have suggested in the first place, but I don't feel like she's won and I've lost. I feel like I'm proud that I'm doing what's good for Jasmine.
Yeah.
So it's this personification is so vital because here's a classic example. This is actually a really good example. If I think of God or any god or goddess throughout human history as a separate non-material entity floating around somewhere, okay, then I'm going to miss the power of the personification. I'm going to miss the inescapable reality. Like I say, Helios is inescapably real. Poseidon is inescapably real. Gaia is inescapably real. You don't have to personify those realities, but the realities that they point to are inescapably real. And that's why I love the fact that Hollywood has just gotten with the program in a major way. Anybody watching or listening to this, just put natureisspeaking.com. I think that's what it is.
Natureisspeaking.com.
And there's these videos that have now been done. Julia Roberts, for example, speaks as Mother Nature. She doesn't speak about nature. She's nature giving voice. Harrison Ford speaks as the oceans. You could say that's the voice of Poseidon today. And I mean, these are kick butt. I mean, some of these videos have had millions of views. They've gone viral because they tap into the power of personification. And so for me, God is a personification of reality. I put it this way: God is reality with a personality, not a person outside reality.
So, you know, Uncle Sam personifies the United States. Santa Claus personifies Christmas. You know,
Santa Claus doesn't really personify. Yeah, Santa Claus in some ways personifies
for some people
the generous spirit or whatever. But
yeah,
Santa Claus is less of a personification than, say, Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam, you know, could you imagine how bizarre it would be if you're walking into a room and you hear two people debating whether or not Uncle Sam is real or whether or not Uncle Sam exists? Your first thought was they don't get it. Uncle Sam is a personification of the government. Of course, the government's real, but of course, it's not literal. So.
Yeah. So, but we all assume when we talk about Santa Claus or Uncle Sam that there really is no such person. It's just a symbol or a representation.
A personification.
Yeah, personification. Right. So that's what you're saying with regard to Jasmine. There is no such thing as Jasmine, but
this is it. I want to stay with this for a second because there really is.
Well, that's what I would argue.
Their relationships are real.
Yeah, and they're more than the sum of their parts.
That whether we call that reality Jasmine or not, but there is a relationship between me and Connie that is not just our differences. It's the whole that is more than the sum of the parts, or a whole that is different than the sum of its parts. And by giving that reality a name, it allows us to have a healthier relationship to that reality. So by giving North America, the continent of North America, a mythic name, we have a more intimate personal relationship. And by giving what's inescapably real, like what's real whether you believe it or not, and I think time, nature, and mystery, whatever else reality is, at least includes time, nature, and mystery. So for me, God is inescapably, undeniably real, or the goddess, whatever you want to call it. But for us, the word God is like a name, a proper name, a sacred name for reality as a whole. And the first thing that we know when we study, when we learn about reality, is that there are limits that are real. In fact, what I sometimes think is the ecological limits, by not honoring our ecological limits, that we have, we're creating hell. That's why I interpret the mythic story of the fall of Adam and Eve, not as the disobedience of one human being disobeying God, but humanity dishonoring God's limits. God says, okay, all this is cool, stay away from that tree. That's a limit. We dishonored that limit, and by dishonoring the limits of nature, the ecological limits, we take ourselves off the path of paradise and we put ourselves on the path of hell. And that's what we're doing now. And the only way of salvation, again, using mythic language, but the only way of salvation is to come back into right relationship to reality. And that's the path of integrity. For me, Christ is not a supernatural person floating around somewhere. Christ is the incarnation or embodiment or personification, a personification of integrity. You may think there's some path to right relationship to reality that bysteps integrity. you're deceived. There's no way. And so Satan is not some disembodied spook. Satan is a personification of everything that would lead us or could lead us to be out of right relationship to reality, everything that would lead us to be anti-future, personified. So from that vantage point, Satan and Christ are inescapably real. They're not supernatural beings. They're personifications of that which would have us destroy the future, or that which would have us save or help or be a blessing to the future.
Cool. I want to stay on this personification thing for a bit.
Cool.
So, and I think it also relates to nested creativity. I mean, in the sense that, like a jellyfish is more than the sum of all the little things that make it up. Or our body, 10,000 trillion cells, is more than the sum of all its parts. It can do things and know things and whatnot that no individual cell can do. I would suggest that there's a collective consciousness to you and Connie that you call Jasmine, which is more than the sum of you and Connie. And the same is true of families, towns, nations, the world. You get sort of wholenesses that are more than the sum of their parts at every level. So that's one point.
Yeah, well, before you go on, because
Yeah.
that's a really important point. A dear friend and a colleague of mine who died just a few years ago, Walter Wink, W-I-N-K. He wrote a series of books on naming the powers, engaging the powers, and the series was all about was that what the Apostle Paul and others in, say, the New Testament or the Christian scriptures referred to as powers and principalities were personifications of what we would call corporate personhood or corporate personality. I mean, cities, there's a collective, if you personify a city or personify what we would call a corporation, that is a group of people making a decision collectively, there's a whole new level of evil that's possible where you get the ruling elite that tilt the playing field in their favor. All the laws and things are in their favor. And today we use secular language, of course, to talk about that. But when the Apostle Paul in the New Testament, the Christian scriptures, speaks about powers and principalities, he's speaking basically of the personality of this city or the personality of that city or the personality of Rome or whatever.
And they do have personalities. I mean, you go to a different city, there's a whole different feeling.
Exactly.
Yeah. On this point on personification, I don't think we've milked everything we can out of it yet. And I want to throw something in that might be a stretch for you, but maybe not. I don't know. And that is that when we talk about the vastness of the universe, let's say, and the vastness of time, in a way, it's like, to me, it's like talking about the vastness of the Pacific Ocean by measuring its breadth and width without taking into consideration its depth. And what I mean by that is that in addition to sort of the spatial and temporal vastness, there are subtler strata of creation, subtler dimensions. And I think this relates to your nested creativity thing, but perhaps in a way you may or may not have considered. The whole historical talk of angels, for instance, to me is not mythical, it's literal, and it has to do with the fact that some people were able to perceive the subtler strata of creation on which such beings reside. And I have many friends alive today who I talk with regularly, for whom that's the norm. As normal as it is for you and I to see people walking around the mall, they see them everywhere, and they commune with them sometimes and are told things and this and that. And these are normal people running businesses and stuff. So when we talk about personification, I would suggest that when you have something like the sun, Helios or Sol or Surya, the Hindus called it, it's not only a hydrogen fusion reaction, but it's actually an embodiment of intelligence. Intelligence has taken a concrete form, and that concrete form on the gross level has its corresponding strata on subtler and subtler levels, such that that form can actually be a conscious being. So Gaia can actually be a conscious being. Surya can actually be a conscious being with bodies very unlike what we ordinarily consider to be life-sustainable, biological bodies, but which is very much as much a conscious being as we are. And this would kind of apply to the large and the small and all sorts of different things, which, I don't know, how does that strike you with regard to what you've been thinking about personification?
Well, it strikes me, there's a couple things. One is that that's a metaphysical perspective that some people find tremendously inspiring, and it matches their own experience. There are others for whom, either metaphysically or experientially, they've not had that experience.
Right.
They don't see or interpret the world that way, or they would interpret those sort of in a more metaphorical way or whatever. I don't have a stance in terms of the rightness or wrongness. I find that my hunch is that most angels and fairies and spirits and spiritual entities are, again, personifying some relationship that's actually quite real, and that that there is value for people for whom those experiences are real, and that helps them live in right relationship with the water, the air, the soil, and the life forms of their bioregion. Man, I am a deep bow of gratitude and honor of that. But to those people for whom those spiritual experiences cause them to discount nature, or play less, or discount the importance of living in a sustainable, life-giving, mutually enhancing way with their bioregion, then I think it can be problematic. So I view that towards any spiritual or metaphysical beliefs or experiences. I mean, people can have profoundly real subjective experiences where God or reality tells them to go in this direction. Well, how do you discern whether that's your own self-deceptive nature, whether that's your addictive nature, whether that's, all the kinds of things that could be harmful to others or harmful to yourself or harmful to the natural world? I mean, okay, I have a profound, inescapably real subjective experience that tells me to go kill this person.
Yeah.
Well, on what basis? I mean, so we have to honor that one of the things that God, reality, has been revealing through evidence, through evolutionary psychology and evolutionary brain science, among other places, is that we have self-deceptive instincts. And that's why we need the collective. Scientists are just as prone to self-deception as anybody else, but the community of scientists, where there's motivation, where there's incentive to prove each other wrong, is usually a good thing in the long run in terms of helping our theories and our understandings of reality come into a closer alignment with the way reality really is.
No, I agree. And obviously someone could be saying stuff that sounds like they're having mystical experiences, and they could be psychotic or something.
Right. And one of the things that, again, for me, one of the great sacred responsibilities that we have as humans is the responsibility to interpret life in ways that serve our larger communities, in ways that serve the future, and in so doing also serve us. So there's that interpreting life generously or mythically or relationally, interpreting life, because we don't experience reality as it is. We experience reality through the lenses of our interpretation. Exactly. That can't be distinguished, because we live in a world of symbolic language. And so all animals interpret. In fact, you could probably argue that all plants interpret. But certainly when you start moving into the realm of symbolic language, that is, words that create worlds by how we interpret, our interpretations matter. And so if I interpret that the universe is out to get me, if I interpret the universe is conspiring against me, or reality or whatever, and those are the lenses through which I interpret, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Even if somebody's nice to me, I'm going to interpret it like, yeah, what are they out to get? So I become cynical, skeptical, But if I interpret that the universe, is conspiring on my behalf, it's just an interpretation, but I'm going to filter through that. So even when difficult, challenging, painful things happen, rather than judge it or say, oh, why is life condemning you? It's like, okay, how's this God blessing me in disguise? How's this the universe conspiring on my behalf? How can I grow or learn or evolve through this? It's not like one is true or one's not. It's just that one is profoundly serving of my life and the world. And so I choose to interpret that the universe is conspiring on my behalf. I don't honestly think I could argue and compellingly convince my friend Michael Shermer that that's the case objectively. But what I can say confidently is I know that that's the most kick-ass way to live my life. Because if I live my life as if the universe is conspiring on my behalf, I love my life, and the people around me find me to be a more generous, compassionate person that gets over difficulties really quick, because I'm filtering through how is life conspiring on my behalf. It's just a useful stance, but for me it's one of the most useful stances that there is.
No, me too. I mean, and if you see life as having this sort of evolutionary imperative toward higher expressions of creativity, higher consciousness, however you like to define it, then you see everything as ultimately being in service of that, and it makes the universe a lot more friendly a place.
Right, but there's a difference. If I take it as an objective metaphysical truth, rather than a subjectively empowering useful belief, there's a big difference. I know a lot of friends who are in several very close friends in the New Age, New Thought movement, that they just, they're now in bankruptcy. They're now in crisis because they were living beyond their means, right. But they had this magical view that the universe is, if they just have the right beliefs, then the universe is going to be like this bank, machine that is going to keep flowing blessings. And I think the universe would just as soon kill us. I don't think the universe cares one way or the other about us as individuals. But if I act as if the universe does care, then I'm going to live my life in a more generous way. But the important thing is, again, this is what reality has been revealing through evidence, is that we know of 24 complex civilizations in the last 5,000 years. Okay, we know, we're aware of, there may be others that we just don't have the evidence for, but we know of 24 complex civilizations. They all rise differently, but they all fall the same. They all fall. There's certain patterns where what happens is a civilization or an empire grows beyond what it can maintain, what it can afford to maintain, and starts feeding on itself. It's called catabolic collapse. And in the early stages of catabolic collapse, virtually all the evidence that we have is that people believe that evolution, or if they didn't have the word evolution, just history, was sort of all leading to them. They're the pinnacle of evolution. And they're not aware that they're about to experience 400 years of contraction and hard times and difficulty, because empires and civilizations don't collapse like that. It takes 200 or 300 years, typically, stair step to go down. And so the idea that evolution has led to our complexity and our civilization, and therefore, it's all sort of uphill from there, without recognizing that we are in the declining decade or two or three of the American empire. We are in the declining several decades or century or two of the kind of rapacious industrialism that we've had, and that for most of us and our children and grandchildren, things are going to be more difficult in the future than we or even our parents experienced. But we're not going to get that if we think there's this arrow of evolution, that complexity can only occur when there's the energy there.
Sure.
And we are now in a place where we're running out of the kind of cheap, abundant, easily transportable fossil fuel that's a one-time gift from this planet. And solar energy and wind energy is much more diffuse. So we're going to have to live simpler lives. We're going to have to live less wasteful lives. We're going to have to rely on our neighbors again and help our neighbors out, and they help us out. So we're going to see the emergence of localism and community, and this idea that we get, grapes from Chile shipped up to New York or whatever. This kind of globalization that has been so fossil fuel intensive is going away.
Yeah, and so many things to say as usual in response to everything you've just said. And either we're going to do that willingly, we're going to kind of wise up and begin to cooperate and so on, the things you just said, or we're going to be forced into it. So right. if we go through hell and high water as the U.S. and Western civilizations collapse, I wouldn't see that as contradictory to the notion that there's an evolutionary imperative guiding the universe. I would say that Mother is cleaning the dirt off us. We need to we need to go through that in the service of our evolution.
I like that. Well, I mentioned William Catton's book, Overshoot. So if anybody's just coming in, this is the book that I think is the most important book in print. But there's two other books that I want to highly recommend that are actually, both of these people that I'm about to recommend have also grounded. They both consider William Catton's book, Overshoot, to be one of the best books they've ever read in their lives.
This is one of the advantages of living on the road. You have a lot of time to read.
Exactly. Is Richard Heinberg's latest book called Afterburn, Society Beyond Fossil Fuels. It's not just doom and gloom. It's about a positive vision of the future, but it's also in touch with reality. So I highly recommend Richard Heinberg's book, Afterburn. And then my favorite author in the world, John Michael Greer. I've read 10 of his books in the last 2 years. His blog posts, like 50, 60, 70,000 people every week read his blog posts on the Archdruid Report. And this is Collapse Now and Avoid the Rush, the best of the Archdruid Report. So I highly recommend John Michael Greer and Richard Heinberg, in addition to my main mentor now is William Catton.
Now, a few minutes ago, you spoke of we being lenses, you know, and that we all see things differently because we're lenses. Here's a quote from William Blake that I'm sure you're familiar with. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. For man has closed himself up till he sees all things through narrow chinks of his cavern. So I would say, and this comes back to the whole notion of spiritual development and you know, the possibility of there being universal truth or universal reality that we're all seeing partially, as you know, blind men feeling the elephant. I would say that if we all, theoretically speaking, if we all cleansed our windows of perception a whole lot to the point where they were clear, then there would be pretty much universal agreement about some of the things that we now just have to sort of grant a lot of latitude for. You know, oh, well, my friend believes this, I believe that, whatever, we're friends. We could actually get right down to a scientific experiential verification or rebuttal of many things that we now consider metaphysical.
Yeah, I don't know about that, Rick, because the only way that I can think of that human beings en masse, all of us, or lots of us, or even just a few of us for that matter, can totally cleanse the lens of our perception is to live without language. Once we use symbolic language, we're in the realm of interpretation, and those interpretations fog our view, shade our view, focus our attention, and so, and even the idea of infinite is a human construct. It's a category. It's a way of thinking. And certainly, I think the idea of limitlessness, the idea of infinity, the idea of unlimited possibilities served us at one time in human history. And I don't think it serves us anymore. We need to honor, this is why I say God is in the limits. We need to honor the fact that the water and the soil and the health of the soil and the ability of our atmosphere to absorb carbon dioxide and the ability of our oceans to absorb our waste, the ability of that nature is not unlimited and nature is not infinite. I mean, yeah, you could talk about perhaps at the scale of the universe as a whole, I don't know, but in terms of this planet, let's just start here, that there is not an unlimited or infinite amount of resources that we can take from the natural world. There is not an unlimited or infinite ability for this planet to absorb our waste and our refuse and all that kind of stuff. And so I think that I would rather say, I don't know if we can cleanse our perceptions and whatever. I do think that we need to at least have as clear-eyed an understanding as possible of ecological reality. That's why I love William Catton's book, Overshoot, so much. That we can then say with a humility, okay, as an individual and as a member of different collectives, different groups of people, I'm committed to doing everything I can to be pro-future, to live pro-future, to vote pro-future, to work toward a healthy future as a sacred responsibility. And that doesn't necessarily require us to cleanse the lens of perception, because I don't know that that's possible, given we live in a world co-created by symbolic language, where words create worlds. That is, the worldviews that we live and move and have our being within are co-created by the language that we use.
Well, let me respond to that. Here's some more from Blake. To see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower, to hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. I think what he was referring to is he's not referring to the fact that, to the non-fact that natural resources are infinite or anything like that. What he's saying is that infinity is intrinsic to creation. It's the essential stuff. It's the essential nature of creation. And quantum physicists will tell you that too, that which appears to be a finite pen on my desk, if you get right down to its ultimate reality, is an infinite something. It's
right. Well, yeah, and the natural world. I mean, take a pen or take a tree or a flower. If you have what my wife Connie Barlow and others have called deep time eyes, right. If you have eyes informed by what God, reality, if you don't like the word God, just reality, what reality is revealed through science about deep time, evolutionary history, then when Connie is in a forest, she isn't just seeing in the way that an uninitiated person who, let's say, meditates a lot but doesn't have any evolutionary understanding of, like, okay, this species of tree has been around 275 million years. This species of tree has been here and there and the different glaciers. When you have a deep time understanding, that is an evolutionary understanding that's been informed by science, Connie actually has a more intimate relationship with forests than I do in most cases, because she has a depth of knowledge about it's almost like she understands the biography. It's like if you and I have just met, we can have a really wonderful relationship. But if we've taken 2 or 3 hours each to share our life story with each other, all of a sudden there's an intimacy. There's a way that I'm seeing you in a deeper way. I'm experiencing you in a deeper way with some understanding of your history. And the same is true for all life forms. So when you understand where these various species of squirrels or raccoons or, the various trees, that depth, that deep time eyes gives us a way to, quote that Blake poem again, to see, the heaven in a grain of sand and, all this kind of stuff. We have that sacred eyes. So deep time eyes and sacred eyes, I think, will definitely serve us in helping us move into a healthy future.
Yes. And that's, in a way, an intellectual understanding, deep time eyes and big history and all that stuff. But it gets sort of imbibed into our mentality to such an extent that I think it kind of begins to color everything we see spontaneously without having to think about it, right?
It can, as long as we also have the humility to not just think that what we're studying is a machine, like a clock, where, we take apart the clock and break it down and all the component parts and you can put it back together again and you've got a clock. That, no, nature isn't that. If I take a squirrel and take it all down to its parts, I can't put it back together again. There's this what I call divine mystery. There's this divine sacred something, this emergence that makes the whole squirrel, the functional squirrel, the squirrel prior to death, different than a squirrel that's died and that whatever that essence that had that squirrel alive. So there's a humility, there's a generosity, there's again, sacred eyes is sort of my shorthand for it. But there is a way that if we have the humility to know that we are part of nature, we're not the controllers of nature, we're not the masters of nature. And in fact, if we don't regain the kind of humility that all indigenous peoples had in the face of this reality that some people call nature, some people call the goddess, some people call God, whatever, but that we're missing something vital. And in fact, it may be that the only way that we can truly usher in a just, healthy, and sustainably life-giving future is to regain that sense of humility. I see it like the prodigal species. Humanity, the prodigal species, we've squandered our inheritance. We're waking up to our predicament in the pig pen, as it were, and we're coming home to reality, to God, to the Father, whatever metaphor you want to use, but we're coming back home to reality. And there's that humility and sacred eyes that I think is going to be vital in that process.
Yeah. And I want you to elaborate more on what humility and sacred eyes means, but let me just throw in something here from the Bhagavad Gita, which is, I forget which chapter, but it's that the enlightened person sees all beings in the self and the self in all beings.
Amen.
And what that means is that you and I are actually the same person. Superficially, there appear to be two of us. When we get right down to it, we are the same consciousness. It's like the electrical field. It shines through this light bulb, it works through this camera, it works in this iPod, and it's the same field expressing itself through different instruments. So you and I are different instruments, but different sense organs of the infinite, we could say, expressing in different, reflecting. Well, and another analogy, the sun, same sun, shining on a bunch of different things. It reflects this way off a pond, this way off a mirror, this way off a diamond, and yet it's the same light, just reflecting differently through different reflectors.
Right, and we're both being breathed by life. I mean, we talk about I'm breathing, you're breathing, but in a way, I don't have to think about it. I mean, life is breathing through me. There's one life that breathes through all creatures. There's ultimately not the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, the Mississippi River. There's one water system of planet Earth, and that same water system flows through our veins and comes down our face when we cry. And so that's, again, coming to that awareness of that we participate in a what I call sacred reality, that we need to live in right relationship to reality. That's why I call my message these days the gospel of right relationship to reality. That is the good news that's only possible when we honor what's fundamentally, undeniably, and inescapably real.